Speaking of a little different, that brings us to Daniel. I guess it's not a good enough segue as it is to get to the book of Daniel. Daniel's an interesting book. So Daniel is unique, and you know how much I love unique. It is unique in the biblical experience because it is what we can call apocalypse literature. It is a vision of the end times, and it is a work where divine providence is relayed through a human being, which of course would be Daniel, where God's will and God's wisdom is made known to people through Daniel. And there's a lot of, especially towards the end, a lot of visions about the end times and how things are going to progress through history. If one could pick a theme, well, one of the themes, at least through Daniel, is the idea of divine sovereignty, right? So God is the boss. So even though we have different kings, different kingdoms, in the end, that's great, but God has the final say. And it's through God's will that things happen. And so in this book, it takes place during the Babylonian Empire. It takes place during 6th century BCE. Daniel is we'll see in the very beginning, he is taken prisoner by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and amongst all the exiles out of Jerusalem, out of Judah, they go to Babylon and they become sort of part of the Babylonian court because they are seen, him and his friends as sages, as people with wisdom, and so they get a little bit of a gig, so to speak, in the Babylonian court. And sort of like if the king needs help, if he's in trouble, and his other wise men aren't cutting it, they sort of call Daniel and his friends over. Hey, help us out! And then Daniel, of course, solves the problem. He interprets the dream, whatever it might be, and then gets a promotion or gets some high praise. And so these stories are, I don't think, when I read it at least, I wouldn't say they're meant to necessarily be linear. They were definitely, I think, pieces that were written and then sort of compiled into a unit of Daniel's stories, right? And the editor sort of creates this, so it does flow, but it sort of creates a bigger narrative from Daniel's stories that are around. If we were to read in Ezekiel, there's a piece of Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 14 through 20. It mentions Daniel, Noah, and Job, as some righteous sages of antiquity. And if we notice, like Noah and Job are not Israelite, right, by their nature, right? Noah is pre-Abraham, so he's not part of the Israelite lineage. And Job, as we mentioned when we studied Job, he's clearly not, I think, meant to be seen as an Israelite. And so that Daniel is in here, I think it doesn't refer necessarily to this Daniel, but I think there's an idea, this name Daniel at least, was connected to wisdom and sages, that there were learned tales about a Daniel, right? That Daniel was somebody who was a judge in, even in like Ugaritic texts, you have Daniel stories. And so having this character named Daniel makes sense in that greater context of wisdom literature, of somebody that is going to sort of be this sage, this judge, this very strong character. The book itself consists of two major thematic parts. So your first part, 1 through 6, we're going to focus on those today, are collections of stories of Daniel in King Nebuchadnezzar's court. So Daniel, how he exists in that world, and 7 to 12 are the more let's call it esoteric and more confusing parts of the narrative, where it's a lot of big stories about the end times, and the history of kingdoms up and down, as some ascend and then some descend. And so he gives us, in very vague and very prophetic terms, some of these different historical events that haven't happened yet, but will happen in the future times. With that said, even though Daniel, it purports to be from that 6th century timeline of Babylonian exile, and not so much. It's written a lot later. It's actually a very late book. It's probably one of the last books that we have in terms of the biblical canon of when it was written. It was probably written close to the time of maybe 167 BCE, during the time of anyone 167. Greek time. So Alexander the Great's dated to around 332, and by 167, we're talking about the time of the Maccabees, Antiochus Epiphanes, and the rest of them. So it feels like this book was probably written for that audience, because Daniel, for those of us who have some familiarity with the book, Daniel he keeps his faith, right? He keeps his religion, his traditions underneath foreign domination, right? And so even though he's told, he and his compadres are sort of told that they have to worship a certain way or do certain things, he maintains his adherence, his observance of his faith. And so one could read this then as a positive sort of uplifting shot in the arm kind of text to the Jews who were living under Greek rule, and saying, hey, you can keep your faith, you can stay being Jewish, even though you're under foreign domination, under a king bent on killing you, or on a kingdom bent on assimilating you. Then you can take the example of Daniel, keep your faith, observe the Jewish traditions, and you'll be all right. So one can see that being the message to the Jews under the threat of Hellenistic rule. Also, what makes the book so much fun is that it is not written in Hebrew by itself. It is written in Hebrew and in Aramaic, which makes it just a joy to try to translate and to read, because it's really confusing, which helps, again, make the translation, even in scholarly texts, a little bit complicated, because some of these Aramaic words, a little tough to parse. But that being said, we do our best. With that being said, we're going to dive into it. So I'm just going to share my screen in a moment. Any questions before we begin, or as we begin? Boom, here we go. Let's make that a little bigger. Here we go. Okay. Brahms, you were the first ones in. You're first on the box here, first on the line.
Let's see. In the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Eternal delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, together with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. He deposited the vessels in the treasury of his God.
Okay, so a nice, historical context here, that the King Jehoiakim of Judah, the last king of Judah here, Nebuchadnezzar, comes down, wrecks everything, takes, the king, takes the stuff out of the temple, they destroy the temple, and they bring him back to Babylon, right? And all the stuff goes into the treasury, right? The Babylonian coffers. Okay, Melissa, you want to keep going?
Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring some Israelites of royal descent and of the nobility, youths without blemish, handsome, proficient in all wisdom, knowledgeable and intelligent, and capable of serving in the royal palace, and teach them the writings and the language of the Chaldeans. Very
nice. And see lots of fun names and terms in our book of Daniel. So good old Ashpenaz, is there to help out a little bit, to bring these Israelites, these Israelite nobles, to get to work, come into the court and put them to work, teach them some writings and teach them a little bit about how to speak, in the Babylonian tongue. That way they can be useful as scribes.
Isn't that how you take over also?
Yeah.
It's like the Russians do that. With Russification, you move into an area and you make your language the language, of the land, and you read your books and all of that. So that's a way of pushing your influence in.
No, 100%. And actually, it made me think actually of Israel. Is that when you get to Israel, the first thing you do is Ulpan. They have you go in for 3-6 months of this intensive immersion of Hebrew. That way you come out speaking the language in the society. But yes, 100%. That it's a way of really trying to acculturate people, to what's going on. So. Yeah, definitely true. And so yeah, it's trying to get them there, get them involved. And we know, from the history, obviously, is that this worked out pretty well for the Jews of Babylon. Not that it was all ice cream and milkshakes and puppy dogs while they were there, but life in Babylon after 50 years, when they were given the opportunity to return back to Judah, a lot of them had acculturated and sort of been there and created a life for themselves, and they wound up staying and not going back to Judah when the Persians took over. Okay, now it's time to do a little comparison here with Esther. Sharon, you want to pick up here, or does Tyler want to read, or is
he says
okay.
no.
Okay, that's okay. Sharon, you want to pick up the king?
The king allotted daily rations to them from the king's food and from the wine he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's service.
In a very different way, one could compare this a little bit to the story we read last week, the Esther story, right? Because instead of being beautiful young virgins, we're getting handsome young men who are being brought into the fold here. And they're given, their allotment of food or makeup, depending on which story we're talking about. And they're being sort of trained for an X amount of time. And then they're coming into the king's service. Esther more, a different scenario, but certainly a similar idea. There's this time of preparation before they get in good with the king, so to speak. So now we have Daniel and part of his merry band. They're going to get them in the very next paragraph that are part of this training program. Okay, so Sharon, you want to keep going? You get to have the fun names.
Among them were the Judahites, Daniel, Haniah, Mishael.
You had it right, Mishael.
Yeah, and Azariah. The chief officer gave them new names. He named Daniel Belteshazzar, Haniah, Shadrach, Michael, Meshach, and Azariah Abednego.
Okay, excellent. Well done. Well done. We had a lot of fun with that. So yes, as if the Hebrew names aren't hard enough, right? So the Hebrew names give rise to Babylonian names as well. So, and again, like we had with Esther, right? Esther is also Hadassah, right? So she has a Jewish name and she has a Persian name. And the same thing here, again, reverse. We have the Hebrew name first, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah become Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Lego my Abednego? I don't know.
Abednego.
Like
like the old song, Meshach Abednego.
Gary, I'm thinking the same thing. I know those names.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Better than me then. I have no idea. But so they get these Babylonian names, and now they're in the service. Now they're in the royal service. So again, a little bit like Esther, they have the different names, they have the service requirements, so to speak. They have their internship, maybe you want to put it that way. And now they get called up to the big leagues. They get called up, they get promoted. But now we have a question. So we have Daniel, who has to live this way for a little while. But now the question is, now what's he going to do for food? Because Daniel, as a Judahite, might have different dietary restrictions than his fellow compadres in service. Marilyn Warner, you want to pick up there a little bit?
Sure. Just one quick thing. I just want y'all to know I've missed you the last couple of weeks. I had out of town company, but I really missed seeing everybody.
Good to have you back.
Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank. So he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile himself. And God disposed the chief officer to be kind and compassionate toward Daniel. The chief officer said to Daniel, I fear that my lord the king, who allotted food and drink to you, will notice that you look out of sorts, unlike the other youths of your age, and you will put my life in jeopardy with the king.
Okay, so basically Daniel's worried about the bacon double cheeseburgers, and fried shrimp platters that the king is serving, here at the buffet, and doesn't want to eat all this food or drink the trophy wine, as well. And so he says, "Look, I don't want to eat this stuff." Doesn't want it, and then he goes to the one in charge and says, "Look, I don't want to eat this junk. It's not for me." But the guy's like, "Look, if you don't eat, and you get skinny and you get weak, I'm going to be in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble with the king. So what are we going to do here? Because if you don't eat, it's going to be a problem." So, Marilyn, you give me a little bit more here. It's like it went down too far. Marilyn, here, Daniel replied.
Daniel replied to the guard whom the chief officer had put in charge of Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, giving us legumes to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the youths who eat of the king's food, and do with your servants as you see fit.
We're going vegan. I mean, that's where we're at right now. We're going vegan. Give me some beans. Give me some water. It's all we need. It's all anyone needs, right? Some lentils, some legumes, and some water. I'll be fine. I'll be healthy. Keep your pork chops. I'm gonna just have the bean salad. And so he says, "Let's do this, and then I'll show you who's healthy. We'll be fine. And if in 10 days we aren't, we'll have a different conversation, But let's test out the vegan diet first before we have to eat all this other junk." Okay, fair enough. Let's see what happens. Gary, you want to pick up here?
Okay.
You scroll down first. Okay, go ahead.
He agreed to this plan of theirs and tested them for 10 days. When the 10 days were over, they looked better and healthier than all the youths who were eating of the king's food. So the guard kept on removing their food and the wine they were supposed to drink and gave them legumes. God made all 4 of these young men intelligent and proficient in all writings and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding of visions and dreams of all kinds.
Okay, so it worked out for him, worked out. Not my cup of tea, perhaps, but that worked for them. Some beans and some water. Sei gesund, they're healthy, so that they should be doing okay. And then we get this little addendum here that God made them all wise, Daniel in particular, of course, with understanding of visions and dreams, much like our friend Joseph, right, from earlier in the Bible, right, that Joseph has the ability to interpret dreams. So we have some tradition, obviously, of dream interpretation in the Bible. So we had a little callback to Esther, a little callback perhaps to Joseph, in terms of a little compare and contrast. Joseph, of course, also serves under a foreign rule, right? He goes to Egypt and goes into royal service and is a vizier. He's a high minister in Egypt because of his ability to interpret dreams. So there is some comparison, of course, there as well. Okay, we did that. Somehow I skipped up. Okay, Gary, give me one more.
Okay. When the time the king had set for the presentation had come, the chief officer presented to them Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, and of them all, none was equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So these entered the king's service. Whenever the king put a question to them requiring wisdom and understanding, he found them to be 10 times better than all of the magicians and exorcists throughout his realm. Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus.
He was there for a while. He lasted the entire time. Must have been doing a good job, according to this chapter. He was there the entire, basically, rule. Because Cyrus is the Persian king who takes over, from the Babylonian rule. And he did pretty well, 10 times better than all the magicians and exorcists. Not a bad day. He's doing well. I'm not sure how one quantifies it, but that being said, 10 times better. Okay, so that's our introduction to Daniel. Now we get to chapter 2. Bob, you want to pick up here?
second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. His spirit was agitated, that he was overcome by sleep. King ordered the magicians, exorcists, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to be summoned in order to tell the king what he had dreamt. They came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I've had a dream, and I'm full of anxiety to know what I have dreamt.
There you go. So yeah, so he had a dream again, much like Pharaoh, in the Joseph narrative. He dreams a dream of time gone by, and so he's dreaming a dream here, and it's not great. He's agitated, he's stressed out, and so he wants to see what's going on here. He wants to know, and so he brings all of his dudes that he has here, these magicians and sorcerers, etc., etc. Come, tell me what I've dreamt. Give me a little insight here. And of course, we can guess where this is going. Bob, you want to give me one more here? The Chaldeans.
The Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Relate a dream to your servant, and we will test its meaning. The king said in reply to the Chaldean, I hereby decree, if you will not make the dream and its meaning known to me, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses confiscated. But if you tell the dream and its meaning, you shall receive from me gifts, presents, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its meaning.
Yeah, so first thing, here, the greeting, right? And so how when I'm trying to think of a good example, maybe someone has a better example, but like when you greet someone who is a royal person, if you greet someone with a special honor, there are formulas, there are things you say. And so when they speak to the king, that's sort of their way. That's their formula, So, "Oh King, live forever." That's sort of the way they respond to him. And we'll see that phrase happen a few other times. It's like they'll live long and prosper, or just sort of something that they're going to tell him as an honorific, as something to sort of just say. Okay, and so. We gotta think of one for rabbis. Oh, Rabbi. So now we're going to relate the dream to the servants. And the king says, hey, I'm not telling you the dream. You tell me the dream. That's your job. You're supposed to be the diviners. You're supposed to be the magicians and the sorcerers. You tell me the dream that I dreamed, and then tell me the meaning. And if not, I'm going to tear you to pieces. I'm going to rip you apart. Tough crowd. Like this guy isn't messing around. You would think cut him a little slack here, but he's going from 0 to 60 pretty fast when it comes to his level of escalation. So if you don't tell me the dream and its meaning, we're going to rip you to pieces and we're going to confiscate your property. But you do a good job, mazel tov all around. You get gifts, presents, a great honor. It'll be fantastic for you. And so, of course, the magicians and Chaldeans are going to try a different tack. Debbie, you care to read today?
Yes.
Okay, Debbie, go right ahead.
Once again they answered, let the king relate the dream to his servants, and we will tell its meaning. The king said in reply, it is clear to me that you are playing for time, since you see that I have decreed that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one verdict for you. You have conspired to tell me something false and fraudulent until circumstances change. So relate the dream to me, and I will then know that you can tell its meaning.
Again, tough boss, he doesn't want to tell them the dream because he thinks if he tells them the dream, they'll just huddle up, and they'll all agree on interpretation and then tell him, and it could be mishigas, and so he wants them to say what the dream is and then also interpret it. So the king ain't buying it. And so the Chaldeans are going to give them a little pushback as well. Not easy to do, but a little pushback to the king. Debbie, you want to keep going here?
Yes. The Chaldeans said in reply to the king, there is no one on earth who can satisfy the king's demand. For great king or ruler, none has ever asked for such a thing of any magician, exorcist, or Chaldean.
The thing asked by the king is difficult. There is no one who can tell it to the king except the gods who abode is not among mortals.
So we're throwing down the challenge, or we're throwing down the gauntlet here. But Chaldean's like, that's impossible. You can't ask for that. It makes no sense. How was anyone going to do that? That you're asking for the impossible, king. King doesn't take it very well, as we're going to see in a moment here. That not really the answer he was looking for. So, come on now. Okay, Carolyn, you want to give a little read here?
Whereupon the king flew into a violent rage and gave an order to do away with all the wise men of Babylon. The decree condemning the wise men to death was issued. Daniel and his companions were about to be put to death when Daniel remonstrated with Arioch, the captain of the royal guard, who had set out to put the wise men of Babylon to death.
Yeah, again, a little rough here. So the king's ready to kill everybody. These wise men, they're all gonna go the way of the dodo. But Daniel says, hey, let me pull aside the guard here. Can we talk for a minute here and let's try to sort this out in a more reasonable way? And so he's going to have a little conversation here and sort of see what he can do to get himself out of this kosher pickle. Okay, Carolyn, you want to give me one more here? He spoke up.
He spoke up and said to Arioch, the royal officer, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Thereupon Arioch informed Daniel of the matter. So Daniel went to ask the king for time that he might tell the meaning to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, of the matter, that they might implore the God of heaven for help regarding this mystery, so that Daniel and his colleagues would not be put to death together with the other wise men of Babylon.
Okay, good. So he's going to stall for time a little bit too. What's going on here? I was hanging out, eating my legumes, drinking my water like a good boy. Now all of a sudden you're going to come kill me? What's happening here? And so Arioch tells Daniel what the problem is. Daniel goes to the king. Very nice. He gets an opportunity, talk to the king. And then assembles the posse, right? Assembles the squad here. Assembles maybe one can say, the dream team, to come together and think about what this dream might be, so they can interpret it for the king, so everyone doesn't have to die. What a nice guy Daniel is. Daniel is going to try to sort out this problem for everybody. Okay. So as Daniel sorts out the problems, I think, Melissa, I think we're back up to you.
The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel spoke up and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and power are God. God changes times and seasons, removes kings and installs kings. God gives the wise their wisdom and knowledge to those who know. God reveals deep and hidden things, knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with God. I acknowledge and praise you, O God of my fathers, you who have given me wisdom and power. For now you have let me know what we asked of you. You have let us know what concerns the king.
Okay, so Daniel's going to start off with a prayer, right? A prayer of acknowledgement. He sort of gets the vision. He gets the download, into his head of what's going on so that he can open the file. And now he's like, hey, now I know the answer. Now I know the problem, solution to the problem here. And so I'll get a little prayer. Very nice. Departure, right, from Esther from last time around, where here God is very present, certainly in the vernacular. Certainly there's a deeper prayer here, relating to God. And so, this is the God who gives wisdom, right, to the wise. And God reveals, the answers to the problems and is responsible for what is about to happen. That Daniel is speaking with God's help and perhaps with God's voice in this moment in time. Okay, and then Melissa, give me one more. Thereupon.
Thereupon Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to do away with the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him as follows: Do not do away with the wise men of Babylon. Bring me to the king, and I will tell the king the meaning. So Arioch rushed Daniel into the king's presence and said to him, I have found among the exiles of Judah a man who can make the meaning known to the king.
Yay, hooray. So we have somebody, we have a contestant here. And, press your luck with the king of Babylon here to try to see whether or not he can interpret this dream. Arioch, very excited. One can assume, hope, maybe, I don't know, that Arioch is probably thinking if this works out, he's going to get a little bit of a prize. If it doesn't work out, it's probably not going to be great for Arioch as it is. But Arioch is pushing this guy forward and say, hey, here's the guy. We remember from the Joseph story. I actually don't remember because I always forget which one it is. Now I'm there. So when Joseph is in the pit, when Joseph is in prison, right? He comes across the winemaker of Pharaoh, the chief butler, and the bread maker, and he tells the bread maker and the wine the butler their futures, right? And because he's able to do that, it helps the winemaker get out of prison, which is a good thing. And then eventually he is rescued, from that wine steward a little later than he should have, according to the biblical narrative. But he was, helpful in that way. So it's nice to have a friend in high places. Is what I'm trying to say. It's nice to have somebody to help you along. So Arioch is certainly helpful here. Helps Daniel get an audience with the king. And now it's put up or shut up time for Daniel. He is there and he is ready to talk to the king. Okay. Melissa, you want to give me one more? Okay, here we go.
The king said in reply to Daniel, who is called Belshazzar, can you really make known to me the dream that I saw and its meaning? Daniel answered the king and said, the mystery about which the king has inquired, wise men, exorcists, magicians, and diviners cannot tell to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and God has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what is to be at the end of days. This is your dream and the vision that entered your mind in bed. O king, the thoughts that came to your mind in your bed are about future events. God, who reveals mysteries, has let you know what is to happen. Not because my wisdom is greater than that of other creatures has this mystery been revealed to me, but in order that the meaning should be made known to the king and that you may know the thoughts of your mind.
Okay, so again, Daniel's a little bit long-winded here, a little bit but he has a lot to say, so he's going to give him sort of the background here, but also letting him know it is humility, that he's saying, look, God gave this information to me. I'm no better than other, people, but God has given me this so to let you know what's happening. And what's it referring to? The good old end of days, time for the end of the world as we know it, and we feel fine. So that's what we're looking at right here, is these thoughts of the end of the world, the way things are going to end up, and so that's going to be the imagery here, for Daniel. Okay, Sharon, you want to pick up here?
Sure. O king, as you looked on, there appeared a great statue. This statue, which was huge and its brightness surpassing, stood before you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was of fine gold. Its breast and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze. Its legs were of iron, and its feet part iron and part clay. As you looked on, a stone was hewn out, not by hands, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. All at once the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed and became like chaff of the threshing floors of summer. A wind carried them off until no trace of them was left. But the stone that struck the statue, where am I? But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth.
Okay, so now we get to the fun part, right? So there's esoteric, weird dreams. So he sees this vision of this really huge statue, right? And so the statue was huge, and it's awesome. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and of course the bottom of it is the weakest part. So when you have the bottom of part of the statue being the weakest, what's going to happen eventually? It's going to crumble, right? It's going to fall down, and so it all sort of eventually becomes crushed. It all starts to begin to fall down upon itself. But the stone that struck the statue becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth.
What do they mean by it wasn't thrown by hand? Not by hands, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay. Wonder what that means.
As you looked on, a stone was hewn out.
But not by hand.
Not by hands. Let me take a look. I got a little bit of an interpretation here. Let's see if I can find something quick for it. This is verse 34. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's God's intervention.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where it comes in. So God sort of throws this stone, basically takes a piece out of it and like sort of throws it at the feet and destroys it, and everything begins to sort of fall down. And so if we see the different parts here, of it, it's supposed to be reminiscent of the different kingdoms, of the ancient Near East at this point in time. And so it's saying eventually all is going to get probably swallowed up in some manner. Let's keep rolling a little bit here. Sharon, give me a little bit more. Such was the dream.
Sure. Such was the dream, and we will now tell the king its meaning. You, O king, king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given kingdom, power, might, and glory, into whose hands God has given men, wild beasts, and the fowl of heaven, wherever they may dwell, and to whom God has given dominion over them all. You are the head of gold.
Oh, isn't that nice? It's nice to be the head of gold. Better than being other things, I guess, right? But head and gold are not bad. Not a bad start. You can be called worse things. So I'll take it, I guess, comparatively. Marilyn, you want to pick up here?
Sure. But another kingdom will arise after you, inferior to yours. Then yet a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. But the fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, just as iron crushes and shatters everything. And like iron that smashes, so will it crush and smash all these.
Okay, so now we have these four kingdoms, right? So the first one, head of gold, we know who that is already. That's Babylonia, right? That's the Babylonian rule. But then it says another rule is going to come after you, and then a third, and then a fourth. For 10 points, can someone name me the kingdoms that come next? A little tough. So you have, of course, the Babylonians, that's the start. Then we have the Median, which is still sort of part of the Babylonian, but it's a new royal family. The Medes sort of come in. Then you have the Persians that are next. They're the third one. And then as iron crushes and shatters everything, that would be our friends, the Greeks, where they come in and they wreck everything and they take over the world. And so those are our four kingdoms that this likely refers to: Babylonians, Median, then we have the Persians, then we have the Greeks. And so it's sort of descending. So you have to look at it two ways. So first is about value, right? And so gold is, of course, like the most valuable. And he's telling Nebuchadnezzar, so of course he's going to be the golden one, so to speak. That's probably the best way to play it. The man was threatening 5 minutes ago to rip people limb from limb, so he might as well be the head of gold, right? That's a good place to put him. But gold is also soft, right? Like you don't make weapons out of gold. You make weapons out of, iron, as well. So that's much sharper. And so, they've got the money, they got the value, but eventually iron is going to smash everything. And that would be the Greeks when they come in. And so gold is valuable, and gold can win you a fight in a different way, but not if you're using the gold to actually, as weapons. It's much better to have different, harder metals like iron. And so the Greeks are going to come in and kill everybody. Marilyn, you want to pick up here?
What was the second one?
The the Medes. And it's another ruling house, basically the Babylonians. So you have the Chaldeans that are there now, and then the Medes come next.
So what were they famous? What were they? What was attached to the Medians? Babylonians with gold. The Greeks were iron.
The Medians, I think, were silver. And then the third kingdom comes. The Persians are bronze. But I think it was silver if we sort of come up.
Okay, just
let me see.
no, it's okay.
Yeah. Here we go. Yeah, the breast and arms were of silver. Then the belly and thigh were bronze, and legs are iron. You always figure, gold, silver, bronze. Just like in the Olympics.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to remember.
It all sort of comes together.
Yeah, it's a good way to remember.
Good way to remember it. But I was thinking like gold, silver, and bronze feel like better gifts than iron. So I guess that's why it comes last. Okay, yeah, Marilyn, you want to pick up? You saw the feet?
You saw the feet and the toes, part polished clay and part iron. That means it will be a divided kingdom. It will only have some of the stability of iron, inasmuch as you saw iron mixed with common clay, and the toes were part iron and part clay. That means the kingdom will be in part strong and in part brittle. You saw iron mixed with common clay. That means they shall intermingle with the offspring of men, and shall not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay.
Very nice. Now let's get back to our history, right, of the Middle East and of the ancient world at this time. So let's remember our Hanukkah story, right? Alexander the Great, iron, killing everybody, taking over the whole world, taxes, all that other good stuff. He's doing his thing. But then, he falls ill. He dies very young. And what happens to the kingdom? It becomes fragmented. It separates, right? Because one person, you can't rule over the whole thing anymore. Alexander was a very strong ruler, but the people come after him can't do it. So they mix. They have to separate it out and create different kingdoms that are not as strong. And here comes our friend Antiochus, right into the story. So that's, I think, basically what we're getting to by the end of this story, right? Is the time of Antiochus and the time of Hellenism, over in Judah. That it's not as strong, it's much weaker than the previous kingdom. It's broken up. And there's a lot of assimilation, and things aren't really going according to the plan for the Greeks. And so, what happens next in the Jewish fantasy land? We will call this at this point. Now, this is our Jewish wish fulfillment part of our text. Gary, you want to pick up here? I can't hear you. Are you still muted? Nope, now you're muted. Okay. Let's unmute you. Gary, I still can't hear you. One more time. Give yourself one more unmute. Is that just me, or can no one else hear him?
Mm-mm.
No, can't hear.
No.
Okay, let me make sure it's on my connection. Sorry, Gary. The joys of this sometimes. Debbie, you want to pick up here? And in the time.
Yes. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, a kingdom that shall not be transferred to another people. It will crush and wipe out all these kingdoms, but shall itself last forever. Just as you saw how a stone was hewn from the mountain, not by hands, and crushed the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future. The dream is sure and its interpretation reliable.
Hooray! Right? So in the end, what happens? God comes down, takes the big old stone, Hulk smash, and smashes these kingdoms to bits, right? And then it's not going to be another people, it's God's rule, right? It's going to be God's time to shine. And wipe out all of these kingdoms that are doing their thing, but God's going to come down and God's going to create an everlasting kingdom. Amen, amen. It should be so, and it's going to be Manischewitz for everybody. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. That eventually God's going to come down and kick some butt here, and it's going to be great. Okay. Going to be wonderful times. So Nebuchadnezzar hears this and he's pretty impressed. No one's getting torn limb from limb today. It's very nice. It's a good day when no one gets torn limb from limb. So Debbie, you want to pick up here a little more here? Then King?
Then King Nebuchadnezzar prostrated himself and paid homage to Daniel and ordered that a meal offering and pleasing offerings be made to him. The king said in reply to Daniel, "Truly your God must be the God of gods and eternal of kings and the revealer of mysteries to have enabled you to reveal this mystery." The king then elevated Daniel and gave him very many gifts and made him governor of the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect of all wise men of Babylon. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to administer the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself was at the king's court.
Very nice. So there you go. All ends well here. So, the king, again, this is part of the Jewish wish fulfillment sort of section of our text here, that even mighty Nebuchadnezzar, the great scary king, he's going to be bowing and scraping and paying homage to his Nebuchadnezzar Jew, who just gave him, a great interpretation of his dream, give him some offerings, let's all dance and sing together. And I'm going to talk about how great your God is. Your God is awesome, much better than my God. And then the king makes him a governor. Right, the king makes him, a higher up of the whole place. And then, of course, Daniel, you don't forget your friends right on the way up, right? So, they helped you get there. So you don't forget your friends. You get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there, whatever his name is, to become another, higher up as well. Gotta be good to your friends. Very important, okay? When you make it big, you don't forget where you came from. So he helps his friends out too, and they're all doing great in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. Huzzah! So you do the right thing. You don't eat those pork chops, in the palace of the king, and maybe good stuff happens. You pray, you stay humble, you work hard. Good stuff happens. Great message for Daniel, and a great message for the community. I like that very much. That gives you a flavor, right, of the book of Daniel, because we're going to have stories after this that are similar, in their scope. King has a dream, king has a problem, whatever it is. No one can figure it out. We have no idea what's going on. And then, let's get the Jewish guy in here. And then Daniel comes in and says, I know. But it's always with, again, that sense of humility, right? That sense of that it's not really his doing, it's God's doing. And God is going to, give Daniel the wisdom, give Daniel the answer, then Daniel's going to be able to help solve whatever the situation is. And so we'll see that, in the coming chapters.
Rabbi,
Yes, indeed.
and I looked this up. If you go on YouTube, you can find the song of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I knew it from somewhere, Gary, and I knew it. But go on YouTube.
It says
and
it's an
on
old
there.
black spiritual.
Yes.
Ah,
That is
It's
kind
an
of
old
funny.
black
40s,
spiritual.
50s,
Shadrach, Meshach,
40s.
Abednego.
Mhm.
Sounds like,
Why would I know that one?
sounds like a song from the 40s. I can just imagine hearing it sung.
I think earlier than that.
What did you say, Carol?
I said, I think it was even earlier than that.
I can even like remember some of the like Meshach, Abednego, something like that is the way the
One,
tune went.
3 children in the land of Israel.
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.
Yeah.
What is interesting is about Daniel, God was there. Esther, no mention of God.
That's right.
Very different, right? Very different
Very different.
stories.
Same king, but completely different.
Very different. Hold on for 1 second here. Give me 1 second. I'm playing you with something. Okay.
ah,
Let's see here what we got.
Oh, I have chili.
Was
Louis Armstrong.
from the land of Israel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. To the land of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was a king of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Took a lot of gold and made an idol, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. And he told everybody with the music of the trumpet. And he told everybody with the music of the flute. And he told everybody with the music of the horn. They must fall down and worship the idol, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But the children of Israel would not bow down, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. So the king put the children in the fiery furnace, steeped on coals and red hot brimstone, 7 times hotter, hotter than it ought to be. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, you couldn't burn a hair on the head of Shadrach. Laughing and talking while the fire jumping round. Old Nebuchadnezzar called, hey there, and he saw the power of the Lord. And they had a big time in the house of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Oh, 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 Abednego.
What a nice way to end the class.
yeah, I was thinking of the same thing.
It's funny because I'm listening to that song. I've never heard that before. Thank you for that. That's fantastic. That basically is like the next chapter, right? That's chapter 3 of the book of
So we
Daniel.
don't have to be here next week.
I mean, like we could skip that chapter, go to chapter 4, because that is basically chapter 3.
Marilyn, thanks for thinking of
Yeah,
that.
that was great.
That was fantastic.
Fantastic.
I
Yeah,
just have to
Marilyn,
tell,
thanks for coming up with that. Thanks
I have
for
to tell
thinking.
Pete to cut out the last 5 minutes of Torah Bible study this week because we're going to get in trouble for copyright infringement.
I heard that Louis Armstrong received his first trumpet from a Jewish couple that he might have lived with when he was a boy.
He worked for them, hauling coal, and he learned to speak Yiddish.
Yes.
And also, when he would work, she always made sure he had at least one meal a day. And supposedly the story is, for a good part of his life, he wore a Star of David.
Mhm.
Oh,
And I just
fascinating.
recently saw that on a story of jazz.
Mhm.
That's fascinating.
I don't know
Yeah.
where I heard it.
What a cool connection.
Sure, there were several versions of that story, but hey, it worked.
It works, and yeah, that was a fun way to end. So again, thank you
It
for
was.
mentioning that song. That was fun, and
That was
I'm glad I
great.
found a little copy of like, oh, Louis Armstrong. Let's check this out. So
People who didn't come tonight, they don't know what they missed.
I missed a
Right.
little something, and that was really cool.
I don't know how you found that so fast, Rabbi. Like,
Oh, it's the joys of the internet age. I just, I heard the name. I was do a quick Google and figure it out. Awesome. Okay. Thank you all so much. It was great seeing
Thank
you.
you.
Remember, we
Thank
are
you.
not here next week. We have a little bit of a vacation, or basically me just decompressing for a little while. So I'm not going anywhere, but I'm just taking a little mental siesta for a little while, as much as I'm allowed to. And I will catch you all the week after. Not what's today? The 9th. So we'll be back on the 23rd
Okay.
of March. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Rabbi.
Until
Thank
then, all
you
good
so
things. I will catch you later. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
good
Bye-bye.
to see everyone.
Bye.